Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with 10 of Swords. And in this one, we are starting with the beginning of the great big huge event, right? The tournament, right? The great big huge battle. But before we do, we pick up in the aftermath of Wolverine killing Saturnine, right? We saw that at the end of the last video that Wolverine popped his claws, had enough of all of her nonsense, and just impaled that girl. And yeah, following that, Wolverine doomed the world. He basically killed the world. That we're told this in a couple different ways. The first one is in a bit of a kind of opening prologue of all the different things that are going on in the immediate aftermath, and the second is what we're actually shown here, right? So what we're told is that what ended up happening is that with the death of Saturnine, that basically all hell began to break loose, right? The external gate was essentially closed, that arguments kind of went about the Quiet Council in terms of what they were going to do, what they were owed to Otherworld with regards to the death of Saturnine, right? The Quiet Council, again, is the council that governs Krakoa, so at this point, they're kind of cut off from Otherworld, but the conversations were exceedingly short, and the reason why was because the external gate immediately broke open, and when it did, all the armies of Arakko came pouring out, led by the 4 horsemen of Apocalypse, led by Apocalypse's kid, that they basically managed to find a way to control Amenth, and in turn control all the forces, all the Amenthi forces, so all those demons, and they just kept pouring out. The difference here is that while the X-Men do have the ability to resurrect the dead, it takes time to do that, whereas the forces of Arakko had the forces of Amenth, and so they just basically had this endless horde of monsters that literally poured into Krakoa and then the rest of the world. And that 10,000, it was something like 10,000 or thousands of X-Men, of mutants, basically died before a call for help could even be made. Now, when the call for help went out, that you ended up seeing like the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the entire host of Asgard, who all came in response to that. The other thing that the forces of Arakko did is they detonated what was essentially a telepathic mind bomb, which literally ripped through the mutant's higher brain function. So anybody who was telepathic, dead. Anybody with higher level thinking was essentially wiped out, right? The forces of Asgard, the forces of the Avengers, the forces of the Fantastic Four were all destroyed by the forces of Arakko. And so what you end up picking up here is just this entire place laid waste, right? New York, the world itself completely conquered, right? The home of Doctor Strange, right? The Sanctum Sanctorum, totally destroyed. Doctor Strange's lifeless body thrown out of the window, right? So for the most part, it's all completely been conquered. And the only person who was left to witness all of this, right? The beheading of Apocalypse, him being drawn and quartered, the fall of the world, was Wolverine, who was quite literally crucified, right? Just kind of stuck up on this great big huge platform and left there. But then he's immediately, or at least eventually, met by the arrival of Saturnine. And what we find out is this is a gift that Saturnine is giving him. This is her basically telling him, this is what will happen if you fail, right? If you were to successfully kill me, this is what would happen. If your team loses the tournament, this is what happens. If you fail to win this, to hold back the forces of Krakoa, this is the fate that awaits your world. Everything will fall and everything will burn. Now, under normal circumstances, I will say it on the surface, it seemed a little bit disappointing that it was all just kind of a ruse. I expected it to be. I didn't actually expect Saturnine to fall this early. It would have been a pretty interesting scenario if she had, but it's also been established well in the beginning of X of Swords that she's the one that's kind of maintaining the peace here. If she wasn't there, then everything would just kind of break loose. But I think it's also kind of cool that it was shown in sort of a dream state, right? Because what it shows us is how dire the circumstances are. Because there was probably a part of you, and I know there was a part of me that was reading this, and it's like, okay, but even if Krakoa lost, how badly could they really lose, right? I mean, you've got like Franklin Richards, and you've got like all these powerful characters. Could they really actually lose here? And the answer is yes, they could lose everything. The entirety of Earth could fall, right? Everybody would die, every superhero across the world, and all the mutants would all be totally destroyed by the forces of Arakko. This, I think, was a genius idea by Jerry Dugan, because it shows us how dire things would get if it didn't work. And so in response to that, Wolverine's just kind of like, okay, right? Like after seeing this, he does it grudgingly, but he's like, okay, like I get what's actually happening here. I get how extreme things are. Now, of course, this leads to Wolverine being served as sushi. Cypher, of course, eats a bit of it, and then Wolverine immediately picks up something's wrong and that the sushi was poisoned. And so when that happens, he's just like, somebody poisoned my appetizer, right? Like who in the heck did this? Now, eventually, you know, Cypher kind of comes to through a combination of Iska cutting a hole in his throat, right? I mean, Iska's the woman that can never lose. The other thing is that you end up having the white sword, right? The guy that can basically resurrect his 1,000 soldiers or his 100 soldiers every morning, right? So he can basically resurrect the dead, more or less, who shows up here and actually ends up healing Cypher, right? Because we've known for a while that his power is the ability to heal. But the other thing about this, and this was kind of cool, is White Sword is wildly honor bound, right? He's hugely honor bound because he literally says here, like, poison is the weapon of a craven, right? The weapon of a coward. Poison those that you don't think you can beat. What kind of honor is there in that, right? What kind of honor is there in this whole thing? So he's like, I, the White Sword, will not be party to cowardice. And so that's why he ends up healing Cypher. And so it's kind of nuts because Wolverine makes this demand of Saturnine. This is getting ridiculous. It's getting out of hand. They're literally sabotaging us, send us back to Krakoa and call the tournament off and just lock them in their own realm. But the response to Saturnine is, do you really intend to forfeit after the gift that I just gave you? After I showed you what would happen if you lost? Now, while all that's going on, right? While all this madness is happening, you end up having Apocalypse and Genesis, husband and wife, and the parents of these 4 horsemen who are just kind of looking on, and Apocalypse is like, I see you did well with the children. And she's like, I did my best. Right? Because remember, with Apocalypse, there is a measure of honor that goes into it, but honor is not the most important thing. The most important thing is being able to pass testing, because Apocalypse probably looks at Cypher and sees him as somebody who has measured testing and found wanting. Because if that was the case, he wouldn't just arbitrarily take part in something somebody else had. He would have investigated it, right? He would have been like, I mean, is this trustworthy? Or, he would have asked questions. The fact that he couldn't survive simply being poisoned and had to be saved by somebody else shows how weak Cypher is in the eyes of Apocalypse. And so it's kind of one of these funny things, because you end up having Brian Braddock and Betsy Braddock who approach Saturnine, and while everybody's arguing, it's this kind of discussion. One of the funny things is Storm is like pointing her finger at Jim Jasper. It's like, if you had anything to do with this, I'll probably end up beating you up. And it's like, okay, but like, no, you wouldn't either, right? I mean, like, he would just turn you into a teacup and step on you. That's probably what would happen. But Saturnine kind of snaps her fingers and basically mutes everybody, right? So they can't hear anybody else talking. And Brian Braddock kind of makes this request and saying, look, like, I request that you set aside their claim. They like basically declare their efforts as forfeit. They literally poisoned one of us, right? And so because of that, they are effectively cheating. And Saturnine's initial response is like, what you're asking is fair, right? What you're asking is fair and it is reasonable. Had Wolverine not tried to kill me, right? Had he not tried to kill me, I would have granted your request. I would have given you what you wanted because they cheated. But turnabout's fair play. If Wolverine can try to attack me, it's fair for them to try to poison you, right? I mean, Wolverine made the first move. He opened the door for that. And so if I let you stay, I have to let them stay as well. You can't have the rules just kind of favor you because it's just more convenient that way. And so it's kind of nuts because following that, you almost kind of see a little bit of coming together of the various characters who were here. That you see one of the horsemen talking to Wolverine and she's like, I never would have attacked the magistrates. Like, damn, that's pretty ballsy. And Wolverine's response is, I just want to get my people home. And she's like, the singular desire of every brave soldier, right? So they're kind of finding a little bit of common ground here. And that's what's interesting because I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of all this, there's actually a kind of mutual respect that exists between the forces of Apocalypse and the forces of Krakoa. But that's what's interesting about this, right? And that's why stories like this are so intriguing. Now, what they end up doing is, of course, serving the next course. And it's like, everybody take your seats. And they end up presenting these scarabs stuffed with the hearts of Pollinae from the rivers of Wuhave, cooked to perfection in a reduction of the greatest wines from Sevalith. Now, I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. I might actually eat some of that. I know it's scarab beetles and that's gross. It's probably worth trying, right? I mean, it's probably worth giving a bit of a taste to. Now I say that because I'm a foodie, right? And what if it tasted like chicken? I'm just saying, I'm just saying, right? What if it tasted like chicken? Here's a real question. Would you eat this? That's the real question to ask. But with this scarab being served, one of the horsemen is just kind of like, why would you serve me this sacred scarab? Why would you serve me the sacred beetle? And it's kind of a funny reaction, right? Because he takes his helmet off for a second and like is literally powered by a sacred beetle, right? So this is Jaime Reyes. It's not, but it'd be cool if it was. But you end up having Wolverine who just like eats it in his place. It's just like, we can't let the food go to waste, And that's what a lot of this stuff is. It's all basically kind of a ceremonial thing. And so following that, you get to like the main course itself, right? And the main course is really the second time it's being served in the House of Fallen Banners. It's the Great Horned Beast. And the funny thing here is it looks like an enormous steak, right? I mean, it's just cut into huge sections. And the White Sword is just kind of like, I never eat, right? I'm beyond hunger. I don't really need to eat anything. But for this, I will make an exception. And Wolverine's like, yeah, man, it's delicious. This is absolutely amazing. But you kind of see these moments when the two of them kind of come together, or I'm sorry, when these guys sort of come together and find some common ground. Now, one of the funny things that takes place here is when young Cable actually ends up talking to Apocalypse and his wife. Now, young Cable's familiar with Apocalypse. That's one of the wonky things about his character. Imagine that like your teenage self, imagine like if you're a person who's 30 years old, imagine your teenage self basically kills your 30-year-old self and then takes the place of your 30-year-old self in the modern day. That's basically what Cable did, right? Just kind of take that concept and move it forward by like 3,000 years. And that's basically what it is, right? This is just teenage Cable who killed his adult self and then is operating here in the modern day. A lot of the experiences that adult Cable had, teenage Cable simply hasn't had yet. And that's why you see this sort of conversation where he sits down between Genesis and Apocalypse and he's like, man, this must be really weird for you guys. And the response of Apocalypse is, weird is a human word, right? It's used to describe a reality that human minds simply just cannot grasp. That's all this concept basically is, right? In time, you will understand that when you have more experience. Now, this kind of pisses off Cable a little bit. And the reason why is because everybody understands that he's a teenage version of his older self, but everybody here was also familiar with adult Cable. And they all know that adult Cable just kind of had years of experience and wisdom that nobody else really, that his younger self just doesn't have. And that's kind of the bane of his existence, right? Like, well, you'll understand when you're older, right? That's basically what he's being told universally by everybody, right? You'll understand when you're older. You'll understand when you have more experience. And it's kind of a true statement, right? It's very much a true statement because older Cable brought a kind of wisdom to the various characters who were here that this guy just can't do. Following that, you have this hilarious and amazing situation where Cable approaches Iska, right? And he's like, your power is that you cannot be beaten, right? She's like, yep, I never have been beaten and I never will be beaten. He's like, that's so cool. Can you show me your power? And she's like, you'll witness it tomorrow. And then you have Magic who shows up and it's just like, but like, if we're all going to be dead tomorrow, like, let's see it now, man. Let's see it right now. So they start putting her power on display and literally start having her do things where like they put her through all these tests. And so it's like they have all these glasses that are kind of turned like upside down and stuff like that. Like she literally fixes them all. Like they have this thing where they literally put like a little thing under a cup and she can't see what it is. And they're like, where is it? And she's like, it's right there. Like literally every single game of luck, basically, she wins, right? Like every single circumstance where she's not supposed to know things, she just inherently does because that's how her powers work. It's impossible for her to lose. And so she is, and this is kind of a comment that's made by Magic, what if she were to fight Domino? Because their powers are very much in line with each other. Domino is a character who can bend luck to her favor, right? So if Domino decided to go play the lottery, she would win, right? She would just happen to go to the right place to buy the right lottery ticket, to play the right numbers, and then she would come out on top. That's just kind of how Domino's powers work. She's guided by it, right? It kind of guides her decision making. With Iska, it very much seems to be the same way. Now, I would surmise that because of how involved Iska's powers are, and because of the fact that she operates on a much higher level in a more grandiose scale, right? So fighting massive battles, turning entire tides of conflict, different things like that, I would say her power is far more nuanced and much stronger, for lack of a better word, than Domino's powers are, right? So she's basically a far more capable version of Domino. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because if a person who can't lose fights a person who can bend luck to their side, then it almost kind of seems like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. Who wins in that circumstance? Or does everything just explode? That's kind of the question to ask here. But from there, you actually end up switching back over to one of the horsemen again, who's having a conversation with Redroot. And this conversation between the two of them is really interesting, right? This horseman is kind of looking at Iska and they're looking at Cable and they're looking at Magic. And it's like, these guys are just so weak, right? Like they're so weak and they're so soft. But then like Redroot kind of chimes in and says, but I can't help but wonder. And the response of the horseman is like, what? I mean, they're coddled, right? They're unfit. And Redroot says, perhaps, but these mutants were grown on a world that's better than ours. So one, what if they have a strength that we just haven't seen yet, right? We wear our strength on our sleeve. We wear our hearts on our sleeve. We make sure everybody around us knows how strong and capable we are. But if these individuals were raised in a world where they don't have to display that all the time, but they're every bit as strong and capable as we are, then what if we're approaching this with arrogance? What if we're approaching this with overconfidence? If we are, that'll be our undoing. Like we readily display that we're exceedingly strong. They hide it, right? So like it's kind of a crazy thing because it's like that could very well work against us. And the response to this horseman is set those thoughts aside, right? Like look at them. They are inherently weak. They are not on the same level that we are. And that's entirely true. The benefit of Apocalypse's four horsemen is that they know nothing but war and chaos. They know nothing but conflict. They were born and bred in that. And so if you're a person that knows nothing but war and chaos all the time, then of course you would approach a situation or approach a person that that doesn't readily act the same way you do and see a kind of weakness, because where they see kindness, they see weakness, right? That's just kind of the way that works, because it's just not inherently necessary to their survival in the place that they were from. Kindness is what got you killed. And so from there, you basically end up picking up with the tournament actually starting, right? It actually begins. And Saturnine kind of gathers together all of the different cards and says, okay, right, you have all dined well, but now you must return to your chambers and sleep well. For tomorrow, your minds and bodies will be pushed to the absolute limit as you compete for your nations. And the first fight that we get here is Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain versus Iska, the Unbeatable. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.